Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's time for the first segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of November 23rd. We want to thank our favorite band, the former Twin Peaks, for that tune, Our World, coming in. And our first guest today is someone I'm happy to have met while I was sitting on my front porch selling my photos a few weeks ago. And she is the one and only Rozina Kanchwala. And she is a creative entrepreneur and a playwright. She's the founder of a very interesting group called Eco.Logic and Eco Crew. It's a nonprofit that intertwines activism with the arts. Enough of me talking about that. Good morning to you, Rozina.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for accepting my invite. And how about starting right off, telling us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do, how you ended up being an environmentalist and a playwright.
Sure. Let's see. So I have been working in the environmental space for many, many years. I found myself feeling a lot of environmental anxiety, just confused, anxious about the future of the planet. I spent some time abroad where I really got to see the firsthand impacts of climate change on people. And when I came back to the US, I worked in the space. I was in the solar energy world, but I needed a creative outlet to really express some of these anxieties and channel these emotions. And so turned to playwriting. It was something I hadn't done before. It was just something I tried out. And I was living in DC at the time. This was the previous presidential administration to be, once again, our future presidential administration. So as you can imagine, the climate anxieties and all anxieties were high. And so I wrote a climate comedy and wasn't sure how it was going to land, but it was very well received. A lot of people resonated with the themes of the play. And we talked about some really important topics like climate links to migration. So we're able to tell some stories in a creative, comedic way. And that's what really inspired me to start Eco.Logic. I think I've always come back to this question of how do we get people to care? How do we inspire action? How do we build community? And so there's sort of combinations of all of that in Eco.Logic. And so now here I am in Chicago, and the organization is a little over 4 years old, and we do a number of programs, including climate theater. You mentioned Eco Crew. It's a way to bring people together, really build community, to then take climate action. We do some youth engagement programs. So I can go on for a while, but those are some of the things about sort of my journey with Eco.Logic.
Oh, that's great. Well, there's a lot of opportunity to ask questions off of what you shared, but let me go to using theater as a way to move people in a positive direction. Early on in my organizing days, I was in Uptown with a group called Join Community Union, and we had the Join Theater, which my sister Melody James had put together, and we do these little skits around mean old landlords. Tell us a little bit about how you use climate and theater to get people to laugh and to think seriously about the predicament that is right in front of us big time.
Yeah. Well, I could talk about the first play a little bit, and there are some similar themes in the second play, which we're working on as well. First of all, there's a lot of people who feel climate anxiety and may not have an outlet to express it or have a community to commiserate with, right? And so I think having that space just was very important for people who expressed like, oh, they didn't know that other people were feeling this way. And our first play actually took the stage in 2019. So At the time, obviously, climate anxiety levels were high, but less talked about. I think there was some statistic how in 2020, the amount of Google searches for climate anxiety shot up 500% or something. So it's definitely much more talked about now, but still, I think having spaces for people to come together, talk about climate change and their anxieties was just so important. So being able to see it on stage in a comedic, lighthearted way, I think brought an element of lightness because it is a very serious topic and the realities of climate change are really scary. In our second play that we're working on, we're really leaning into this story of a character who, one, is pregnant. So there's a lot of people who question what it means to be bringing children into the world and what that looks like. She's also a climate migrant. So her migration story is tied to climate change. And I think that's a connection that people may or may not completely understand. So using that, using theater to tell the story, kind of personalize that for people. And then there's a lot of themes of friendship. There are two main characters in our play. And there's a lot of commentary around the importance of community, around friendship, what it means to build resilience, and to be resilient in the face of what's coming. So I think that we just kind of lean into some of the things that people are feeling and kind of just give people an avenue to laugh.
Well, Rozina Kanchwala, how about your take on the new administration coming in and what it will mean for energy? Whether it's, he's appointing these people who are big oil kind of tycoons, and there's a lot of criticism of solar, but I'm not sure that he can turn it back. I mean, he's running around with this Musk character who is, has these electric cars. And so I'm not sure, the message we're getting is down on solar, et cetera, but I don't know if that'll really happen. Do you have an opinion on that, a take on that?
I do have opinions and feelings on it. I will say, I think it's bad news. But I do think that there is a lot more mobilization. So I think there was a lot more organizing that happened under the first Trump administration. And I think people are active and ready to go again. So I think there are some silver linings, which is good. And I think what's interesting, Texas, for instance, red state, has, I want to say it's the number one wind state. So in some cases, clean energy is it makes financial sense. And so it's the clean energy transition is happening, and it doesn't matter which administration is in power. Not to sugarcoat the real problems with appointing these oil CEOs and, fossil fuel interest people. But, I think in some ways the tide towards clean energy is already moving and there's only so much that they can do. And I hope that, I just hope that there will be enough organizing to really counter what's coming.
Well, I'm with you on that. And I've learned over the years to revel in the contradictions. There's a lot of contradictions that we have to deal with. One of the things that I do want to talk more about, not only your plays and where you plan to stage them and what Eco.Logic and the crews are doing, but one of the things that really caught my attention in learning a little bit about you was that you spent some time in India. You were a Fulbright scholar, which is a pretty big deal, I think. And you spent a year in India researching agrarian distress. And that might be a topic to study throughout the world. Growing food for the people is getting rougher. What's your take on India, agrarian distress there? What did you see? What did you learn? And then if you want to bring it back home.
Yeah, of course. Agrarian distress really is a nice way of saying farmer suicides. So the year in India was a rough year for many reasons. And just meeting with women whose late husbands had in some cases, drank their last bottle of pesticide because their crops were not growing and they were in debt. So just really, really heavy topics. And I think what I really recognized there was it was this confluence of issues. There was climate change on the one hand, which was changing weather patterns. There was also this agribusiness really taking over. So historically, farmers were able to save their own seeds and grow crops according to what was needed. And now in this case, it was there was a farm that I was at, and it was this like genetically modified cotton plant that they were, sold the seed for. They weren't allowed to save their seeds, and then their seeds didn't grow. So then they were sold pesticides. That didn't help. And so it was just, they were kind of beholden to these large companies. And that's the trend that we're kind of seeing, where there is this like corporate consolidation of power in the agriculture space. So as you said to bring it home. And that's kind of exactly what I'm doing. So I was born in Illinois, and now I'm working on a 3-acre land restoration project in Illinois. So as you probably know, Illinois, we have cornfields and soybean fields, and just it's a huge, agriculture state. But what's ironic is it's also called the prairie state. And I think it's less than 1% of pre-settler prairies still exist in Illinois, and over 90% of our wetlands have been drained for farming or development, which causes huge implications. With the changing climate, we're seeing a lot more flooding. The agriculture fields are responsible for a lot of air pollution, water pollution. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is actually tied to Midwest farms. So as I am coming full circle, I'm very excited to be starting on this land restoration project. We're actually going to be planting this December, which I'm very excited about. So I think back to even your last question about the administration, I think we really can focus on like what we can do and like what ripple effects that can have. So, yeah.
Let me ask you, did you ever meet or know about Steve Packard and prairie restoration, the work that he did?
Tell me more.
Well, he was a guy who was around. He was a political guy, and I don't know if he's still around, but they initiated a lot of prairie restoration.
Okay.
And what's your hope for bringing back the prairie in Illinois, and how much can you get cooperation from corn and soybean farmers?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I don't know the name that you referenced. I was just out at the Morton Arboretum this past weekend. So I don't know if there was someone who really spearheaded a prairie restoration out there, the Schulenburg Prairie, which is beautiful. But the hope, I think, is to really, in addition to doing the actual restoration, I think there's so much importance in telling people the why and bringing in local people, including local farmers, indigenous voices into the process, and just educating people on why this is so important, why these are such important ecosystems for our region, how they will help us in the face of climate, with wetlands being drained, like we're seeing so much more flooding, and it's not a coincidence, And so I think just helping people understand that. And I would just love for people to walk through a prairie during the summer and just feel how beautiful it is. It can be a really spiritual experience. And I think just being able to share that with people in a world where we often just feel a little disconnected from the natural world, I think that type of work is just so important. So I'm just really excited to make it a community space and an effort.
I would love to walk around in your prairie that you're bringing back. Tell us a little bit about what that means. Where is your 3-acre lot or expanse, and what's growing there now, and what do you plan to do to bring it back, and how does this serve as an example for others to mimic that, or to take it a step further, more than 3 acres, say?
Yeah. Well, I should say that there are just a lot of amazing there's a lot of amazing work happening in this space. And I will shout out a group called the Climate Land Leaders, which I did recently join the board of directors for. But they're just a group of people throughout the Midwest doing amazing work and to bring kind of climate friendly practices to their land. And so this particular 3-acre plot is part of a larger 90-acre farm that my family does own. And up until recently, it's been just conventionally farmed as conventional corn, soybeans. The family didn't have much involvement. It was just rented out. But since I've come back into the picture, decided we need to do something different. And so there is a farmer who is working to transition to organic grain farming. So as you probably know, organic takes 3 years. It takes 3 years to transition soil from being conventional to being considered organic. So that process has started. It's been about a year. And so there's about 3 acres. There's sort of a wet area on the land that is what's called will be called an ephemeral wetland. And so we're taking that section and we're going to do some wetland restoration and then some conservation cover, which will be hopefully a beautiful prairie in a couple of years.
I'm looking forward to seeing this. Let me ask you to give a short definition of what Eco.Logic is and what the Eco Crew is, and then give me a little blast on why you use the art to try to change the direction of how we care for our land. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Eco.Logic, sort of a one-sentence overview. We are an arts-based environmental nonprofit that serves to build connections and inspire action. So when I say connections, that means with each other and with the natural world. So our Eco Crew program really embodies that. Eco Crew was started off with this kind of understanding that a lot of people care about climate change and they care about the environment, but they don't know what to do. Sometimes it just feels so overwhelming to know where to plug in. So we create spaces this year we had a 6-week program in Chicago and in DC. We're continuing to iterate on it, but it's a 6-week program led by a facilitator. There's a very specific topic each week. There's resources that people get and a very specific call to action. So, one of our topics, for example, is the role of finance and banking. And a lot of people have bank accounts, and often those bank accounts the money in their bank accounts are funding a pipeline somewhere. But people, could also move their money to a climate-friendly bank if they knew about it. But it's often people just don't know. And I think what's really special about the program is the community. So week after week, people are coming together, interacting, learning from each other. And beyond the 6 weeks, we have a kind of alumni engagement program. So we continue to foster those connections, and having it place-based is really special because then there's a lot of events that people can continue to go to together and have their community. The last question, I know we're getting close to time, but the arts, I think, are so important in the climate movement. And often we're given these statistics, right? Like we're going to hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And I think to a layperson, that just doesn't mean a lot, right? Even to me, who's been in the climate world for so long, like 1.5 degrees, it's just like, oh, it might be a little bit warmer. But to really express and help people understand why that's so serious, I think can be done through the arts. Another statistic we hear often is by 2050, there will be 1.2 billion people displaced globally due to climate change. And again, that's a really big number, but it's hard to really grasp the seriousness of that. And so pairing it with a story of someone who has been displaced due to climate change and really showcasing what that looks like, either through storytelling or maybe through a visual portrayal or something, I think is just so important. So the arts are just so important to what we do. We have an art session during our eco cruise. Obviously, we talked about the eco theater. And so, yeah, just I think there's an appetite for it. I don't think enough environmental movements or organizations use the arts. So we're here for that.
Well, I want to really thank you and invite you to come back on the show in the not too distant future, probably more often than once. Why don't you give us how people could contact you and how they could contact Eco.Logic and Eco Crew?
Perfect.
Give us the deal.
Yeah. Well, Eco.Logicprograms.org. We've got a social media. So on Instagram, we are at eco.logic.programs, I believe. LinkedIn, we're Eco.Logic Program, something like that, Eco.Logic Programs. So check us out. And if you have ideas, want to learn more, want to collaborate, info@ecologicprograms.org would be the best way to reach out. As I said, we're a new organization, so open to partnerships, collaborations, and ideas.
You're terrific. Thanks a lot.